Hey guys, it's Brian Mensing of Backlot 605. We're going to be doing a new thing as of starting now. We are going to be branching off the box office for the Backlot box office. Joining me as my co-host for this new segment that we have is going to be Derrick, our I call him our resident historian. He is our numbers guy. He's the one that basically let us know how everything is going. So who better to join me on doing the box office for the backlot and for everybody to let you know what's everything going on nowadays is Derrick. Welcome aboard there, Derrick.
Hey, good to see you, Brian. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. So we decided, we wanted to break this off. We're going to be doing the box office on its own. Probably, I think we're going to get out of more less of the discussion of the movies and more into the discussion of the box office. Is one of the reasons why we wanted to do that. What are some of the things that we think we should be probably bringing up and letting kind of the listeners and the watchers know kind of what we're going to be going about?
Yeah, I mean, as Brian mentioned, this will be a little bit more analytical in nature. There's a lot of interesting things going on with the box office right now, with a lot of movies still debuting on streaming versus in theaters
Hmm.
only. With theaters really starting to rebuild, especially as we were talking right now, where we've got a whole bunch of blockbusters coming out one week after the other. There's just a lot going on here, and this will be a really fun time to start this off. So I'm excited.
Especially, yeah, especially with the theaters are finally kind of getting back into everything and whatnot. I definitely think this is a good time to really kind of bring that out here. That being said, we've talked about the box office numbers week after week for a long time here. To kind of give someone an idea what exactly goes into those numbers, because when we talk about those numbers, it's not even for 7 days.
No, I mean, usually what you guys are talking about is the weekend numbers that are coming in Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Typically, whenever a new movie opens, that number is also going to include the Thursday preview shows. They usually start in the evening, anywhere from like 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. to help
Hmm.
boost those numbers a little bit. So, a lot of interesting stuff there. And then, of course, obviously, holdovers every week, seeing how far a movie plummets. If it goes from like first to fourth or first to completely off the list, who the heck knows? But a lot of fun activity that we will definitely talk about every single week on this show.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So that being said, I figured we get into our number one at the box office this week here. And this week we actually have No Time to Die, the latest installment and the last installment for Daniel Craig's James Bond. This week we're coming at $56.01 million in its first week. What did you kind of see this kind of coming into this here, Derek?
I had a little bit higher expectation
Hmm.
going in, so um, my hope was that it was going to match what Spectre opened to
Hmm.
6 years ago, which was $70 million. A part of me hoped that there's been a little bit of box office depression due to COVID,
Hmm.
but a part of me thought that again, this has been one of the big movies that's been delayed forever due to
Yep.
COVID. This was actually the first. This is the very first movie to have been delayed due to COVID. It was March 4th,
Hmm.
2020,
Yep.
and that was at the time when they said like we're going to push it out. And this is more when there was more of the concern about the global box office more so than the American box office, because James Bond is very much one of those movies that really depends on it performing across the world because it's
Yep.
globe trotting action. That's just how it works. So that's when they made the first COVID move, and that was just pushing it from like April 2020 because it was going to debut like Easter weekend 2020. And that's when they pushed it to Thanksgiving 2020. And then, of course, it
Mhm.
got pushed again to Easter of 2021. And then it got pushed yet again to this October, where fortunately it stayed. So after 18 months, it's finally out. It's doing all right.
Mhm.
I was hoping for a little bit more from it, simply because this was kind of the big send off for Daniel Craig,
Certainly.
and certainly he's talked about a lot in the interviews. I don't necessarily think that the trailers necessarily gave a huge amount of impression for that,
Mhm.
but I would think that a little bit more of touting that up, is kind of like this is the final Daniel Craig James Bond, which is unique because typically this is the first Bond movie that kind of has an ending, because none of the
Yep.
other James Bonds ever got a send off like this. So this, and that's kind of one of the big things that I liked about the movie was, you know, is kind of that whole what's going to happen. And I was hoping that was going to translate to audiences showing up. And to be fair, a lot of them still did show up. I mean, this is
Yep.
still one of the bigger opening weekends we've had since the start of the pandemic. But I also think, these Bond movies, they gear toward older audiences. There are still a number of those older crowds that are still reticent to come out to theaters, at least right away, due to COVID.
Hmm.
But also, older audiences don't necessarily show up on opening weekend. They'll come out week 2, week 3, week 4, whenever they get around to it. A little bit more old fashioned in that sense versus, like your Marvel movies where everybody's got to be there like
Right.
Thursday night. So,
And one of the things we'll probably talk upon week is in regards to those numbers and how they fluctuate from week to week and whatnot. So what you're probably thinking here is that with No Time to Die, we're probably going to see less of that percentage drop because of the people that would, like you and I, we go out opening weekend and whatnot, but
yeah, we
that
were there
that
opening night for this guy. So,
we were there that opening night. But we're gonna see maybe the ones that who didn't come this week are gonna come next week or maybe the week after that to pick up those numbers that they didn't get originally picked up this week.
yeah. And to be fair, I mean, this is going to kind of have its own niche,
Hmm.
or it's not like it has like any. I mean, there are big movies coming out, but nothing so much in like the huge action spectacle area. So I think
Right.
that's where it's going to be able to kind of linger through, these next several weeks. So
Yeah. I definitely think just because, for the sake of like you said, those action movies and whatnot, there really isn't anything to this caliber in the box office right now. Mission Impossible got pushed out until next year,
yep,
that sort of thing. So I think at least through at least especially through Christmas and whatnot, there's definitely I don't really think there is anything else that's going to quite compete on this kind of level. But I agree with you though. I mean, the fact that this is Craig's last one, this is that legacy franchise that we're looking at. I agree with you. I kind of expected it to be a little bit a higher box office, even whether not necessarily to beat Spectre, but just the fact that it's Bond, it's James Bond, and it's Daniel Craig's last Bond.
yeah, and I think that'll translate a little bit to word of mouth, where people will talk about, you won't believe how this movie ends, or like this
That is
ends unlike
fact.
any other James Bond movie. I did put in here in the graphic here. I did want to note this got an A- cinema
Yeah.
score, which is pretty good. To compare it to the other Craig Bond movies, Skyfall got a straight A.
Hmm.
Spectra and Casino Royale both got an A- as well, and then Quantum of Solace got a B-. So it's doing pretty solid for where this is. So I think for the crowd, for the fans that came out
Hmm.
on opening weekend, it pleased them, and so I think that's
Definitely.
again that's going to help the legs on this movie ultimately. So
I definitely think so too. You have on here that we've got a 45-day window. What exactly does that mean?
so the big thing with No Time to Die is, well, first off, what I put in these graphics here for the top 5 is just indicating, what's the theatrical plan. Because again, every movie has its own different release plan, whether it's going day and date on a streaming service or
Hmm.
premium VOD, or if it's got like a 3-week window or 30-day window or whatever. And with No Time to Die, the whole concept behind this is that, Eon Productions, the company that puts together the Bond movies, and MGM, the studio that's recently reemerged from bankruptcy once again and pretty much has all its eggs in the James Bond basket,
I was
have
gonna
been
say, do they
very
have anything else?
well. I mean, well, now that they're going to be owned by Amazon. Who the heck knows? But the main thing is that they've always been very, very adamant about, this is a James Bond movie. It is a capital M movie. It has to be seen on the big screen.
Yep.
There's even those rumors during COVID where they were like offering it up to like Apple or Amazon, to have a streaming premiere for a price of over $500 million, and nobody bit. There's just been that adamancy of, they want this to play on the big screen. They really want to have it be one of these true big screen experiences. So that's why they're having at least a 45-day window on this. I haven't heard any specifics about when it might actually come to, you know, VOD or
Sure.
anything like that. I have heard that the Blu-ray and 4K Blu-ray releases are going to come out like right before Christmas on December 21st. So I would not be surprised if the
Mhm.
premium VOD release happens like early December,
Sure.
probably. But even then, you still got a good like 60-day window for that. And again, I think they're going to stick very much to that because again, the
It's
action spectacle, the stunts you see in here, that's meant to be seen on a big screen,
yeah.
and they're not going to deviate from that too quickly.
No, and I agree with you. It's definitely a big screen movie. I think with it being MGM and whatnot, this is one of the very few tent poles that MGM has, and they need to bank on that
Yep,
box office.
absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay, so let me get this pulled up here because you actually did wanted to talk the stuff when it comes to the Bond weekends here.
Yeah.
Because
So, yeah, just for funsies, I put this together just to kind of compare and contrast how well the other Daniel Craig James Bond movies have opened over the
hmm
years. And the first thing you'll see here is that No Time to Die is actually fourth in this list, above only the original 2006 movie in his run, Casino Royale.
yeah,
And again, it might pale a little bit into this list, but again, you have to take COVID and everything into
definitely.
account. And again, I think it's ultimately going to have some good legs, but I did just want to throw this out there just to kind of see where the franchise has been. So you'll see Skyfall is at the top of this list. It did $88.36 million. This is back in November 2012. There's a lot of hype going into this one, especially since this was very much tied into the what was then the 50th anniversary of the Bond franchise. And so they were really
Yep.
going all out at that time. I remember they put out the big 50th anniversary James Bond Blu-ray set
I
with
which I have. I have
yep,
that.
yep,
Yep.
with a number of those movies finally seeing a Blu-ray release for the first time.
hmm
Um, there's a lot of anticipation because it had taken 4 years to get this movie. Because big surprise, in between when Quantum of Solace came out and when Skyfall came out, MGM went into bankruptcy again. Um,
Shocker.
so that delayed Skyfall coming out for quite some time. But the good thing about that was they rebounded it. They were able to tie it into that whole 50th anniversary celebration. It
hmm
ultimately made over 300 million at the U.S. box office, and if I'm not mistaken, it actually hit $1 billion worldwide. So
Nice.
certainly within the Daniel Craig run, this is the biggest hit of that era. So it did very well. Then we had Spectra that did 70.4 million. This was November 2015, so nearly 6 years ago. Between that and No Time to Die, again, that had some hype on it too because again, it was going to carry off the goodwill from Skyfall, of course. You had some big notable things like Christoph Waltz coming in as Blofeld, although again, this is one of those cases not unlike Benedict Cumberbatch as Khan, but he's not Khan. And they were like,
Yep.
is he Blofeld? Or I can't really say that I am Blofeld. Um, you also had like Dave Bautista showing up and Monica Bellucci. You had a very loaded cast in there, as well as Sam Mendes coming back, who did direct Skyfall, came back to direct Spectra. A lot of high hopes there, even though I consider it, probably the least successful critically of the, or at least my least favorite of the Daniel Craig Bond movies. It still did all right
Yeah.
in that sense. Then Quantum of Solace, 67.53 million. This was November 2008. Again, this is really banking on the goodwill of Casino Royale. We'll get to how that did, but there was a lot of good word of mouth from that. This came out only 2 years later, so they turned this around very, very quickly. Again, another one that had mixed reception, but certainly had a lot of growth box office wise from Casino Royale, so that was good. Then No Time to Die, we talked about that one already, and then Casino Royale, the lowest one on the list, only opened to 40 million back in November of 2006. It actually opened number two that weekend, if I recall. Number one was Happy Feet, which also opened that weekend.
It's really scary to think that Bond loses to Happy Feet.
Yep. But on the plus side, because Happy Feet was so successful, that's how we got Mad Max Fury Road. So,
This
you
this
know,
is true.
yes.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, just because I'm mentally trying to picture my box set in the other room here. When Casino Royale comes out, this is after we have like what how many year difference between the Brosnan bonds and the Daniel Craig bonds?
Yeah, so that was a 4-year gap. Die Another Day was in November 2002. And that was also tied to the then 40th anniversary celebration of the Bond
So
franchise.
so because one of the things I was thinking is that maybe that's the reason for maybe the low box office. Maybe there was enough of a gap, but really there wasn't that much of a gap. Maybe just a little bit of a Bond fatigue going that's only 4 years between Brosnan and Craig, maybe.
I don't necessarily think it was that. The thing I remember very much from when Casino Royale opened, or you maybe might even recall this, was when Daniel Craig was first announced as James Bond in 2005. There was a lot of outcry for that. There are people who are going, James Bond is blonde. What the heck is that? There was a lot of pushback. And, that probably set the stage for why Casino Royale opened low, but really carried through. Because again, this opened, I believe it was like the weekend before Thanksgiving.
Hmm.
But because of the word of mouth on that, the way that movie was really received, and people were going, actually, this movie is pretty darn good. And it kind of had some legs all the way through Thanksgiving and Christmas, all the way through into the new year. So, that's an important thing to keep in mind there is, there are people who are uncertain, like they seem to have this image of who they would expect to have as a James Bond.
Sure.
And originally, there are a lot of people that didn't necessarily see Daniel Craig, fitting that mold, but certainly Casino Royale really made the case of, yeah, he's got the goods.
Yeah.
And that just grew and grew and grew over the 15 years that he had this role.
Do you think maybe part of it also being that it's a quote unquote a remake? That maybe that would be another aspect of it? That we're kind of
Well,
we kind of rebooted the franchise with Craig?
I mean, that certainly helped as well, because, not unlike what we just talked about, No Time to Die, and you're like, this is an ending. The Bond franchise never had that. I mean, Casino Royale is basically the chance of like, we're going to kind of quote unquote start this franchise,
Mhm.
and certainly got to have a lot of creative fun with that, and kind of trying to provide this origin story of sorts. So that was cool in itself too.
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually I wanted to pull up because I was actually kind of curious here. You make mention of the fact that Craig has been doing this for we're on year 15 of him being
Yep,
Bond.
that's
I
right.
did I did the math just because out of sheer curiosity, he has spent 28% of his life as James Bond. He's
Yeah.
probably about that time where he's like, I'm ready to be done.
Yeah, and obviously making that segue into a new section of his career.
Mhm.
Obviously, a little later in the show, we'll talk about he's kind of got his new franchise to
He
replace
does.
that, so that's good for him.
He does.
And he,
But I will also give at least the fact that, he was more of a supporting guy prior to Bond. He's definitely
yep,
shown that he can be a leading man and whatnot, but he's also been able to, stretch his feet a little bit too, I think,
hmm
because the first thing I think of is like, you look at him as he's a definitive James Bond now, as opposed to the outcry we had 15 years ago. And yet you look at him and go, you were in Logan Lucky and you played a redneck that blew stuff up. That was one of
yep,
the biggest reasons why I wanted to see that because I'm like, I want to see James Bond be goofy.
yes. So
All right. So, moving on from Mr. Bond, we go into our number two spot, which is Venom, Let There Be Carnage. Now, this is week two of Venom. This is one I actually got to see back to back from Bond because I missed this opening weekend. I went from Venom to Bond, and I'm glad I ended on Bond because this was Venom. So, take us away there, Derek.
yeah, so obviously, we had this little gap last week because we didn't have any box office discussion, nothing covered on the show. But just to recap, Venom: Let There Be Carnage last weekend had the single biggest opening weekend for a movie in America since the start of the pandemic. It opened to 90 million. And that took a lot of people by surprise, you know. I'm sure
Took me
I
by
know a lot.
surprise.
Yeah, you know, and the fact was just the numbers just kept growing and growing and growing over the weekend from like, hey, this might actually have a small shot of passing the 80 million that Black Widow did to
Hmm.
getting to Sunday morning. It's like, yeah, it's going to make 90, over 90. Um, I don't think we were prepared for that, especially since like the first Venom also only opened to $80 million just 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So I don't think anybody necessarily saw that there's just that much build up and excitement for it, for Venom
Ex-
2.
Especially with the first one being very divisive too.
Oh,
The,
yes. Oh, yes.
the just like this movie is, the one from 2008, yeah, 2018, is very divisive in the fact that it's a very much a, either you like it or you hate it. There's no real in between for Venom.
And that's the wild thing because typically, if a movie has a mixed reception, that would typically lead to a lower box office
Right.
for the next movie. So the fact that it went up 10 million either indicates that it maybe had good word of mouth ultimately down the line, or people are very loyal to their comic book movies, or their Marvel, or should I say in this case, Marvel adjacent movies. Although, if you saw the end credits portion of Venom 2, that's getting a little sticky. So
Yeah.
who knows where that's
I
going to go?
I think you hit it in a couple of different aspects. The first thing is I think you honestly I think you probably did have people go in there trying to see if they're going to start picking out MCU Easter eggs.
Yep.
But the other part of it too is I do honestly think part of that actually happens to be the fact of the Woody Harrelson as Carnage.
Oh, yeah.
Because number one, we have Woody Harrelson playing a serial killer, with a very infamous character that has been long being wanted to be on the big screen. So honestly, I think a big part of it is the character and who we have playing the character is what's driving this. All those comic book nerds that are like, well, they can't do worse than the first one, so and we've got Woody, so let's just go for this.
Yeah, and I think also too, I mean, obviously there might have even been a little disappointment because the way they set up his character at the end of Venom 1 with the crazy fright wig and all that stuff might have set up the expectation for a little bit of a crazier Woody performance than, what he ultimately delivered in this sequel.
Right.
And I don't know if that's because, to tie it back to the first movie, the first Venom movie was directed by Ruben Fleischer, who directed Woody Harrelson in both Zombieland movies. So they
Hmm.
had, a relationship prior to Venom.
Yep.
Obviously, Ruben Fleischer did not stick on for this sequel. Instead, he was replaced by Andy Serkis, who definitely has a goofy tone to him. I mean, we saw him in Black Panther. We know what he can do.
Hmm.
But definitely a different stride. But definitely, ultimately, at the end of the day, there is still enough curiosity between just seeing what crazy stuff Woody might do, and certainly what crazy stuff Tom Hardy's gonna do if he's gonna do something as
Yep.
crazy as that lobster tank thing from the first movie. So much curiosity going into this, and I think that's just how we ultimately ended up with. Well, we gotta see this just to see what
Yep.
happens.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of those ones where people are like, we have to go to the theater to go see this because we can't see it at home, and we want to see if Tom Hardy is going to jump the shark
Yes, yes, exactly.
or
So
jump the lobster for that matter. So you're saying with this one here, it looks like we have another 45-day window. It looks like that Sony is kind of putting out for this one here as well.
Yep, Sony is standing firm with this one. This is another one that's going to hit physical media. I believe December 14th is
Mhm.
the date I heard on that. So probably will be pretty safe being theatrical only until the Thanksgiving corridor, most likely.
That would, I mean, and I guess that makes sense. Obviously, not only the theaters but the studios, they want to get back to a somewhat of a normalcy for the sake of the theatrical window. I do think that we are definitely seeing we have seen the turn, and I don't think there's any turning back in terms of between release date of the theater to the release date of the home release.
Yeah,
But I don't think that they're ever going to be able to go back to, because prior to pandemic, that window of time was around 90 days.
that's right.
And now that we've kind of pushed into this 45-day window, unfortunately, for the sake of the theaters and the studios, there's not going to be any turning back. Maybe they'll be able to get it pushed out to like 60 days, but
Yeah, I mean,
I can't see
I,
them getting back to the 90-day window.
yeah, I mean, there are going to be very, very few cases where it is that case. I mean, I know last week there was some conversation about how Universal is going to give Christopher Nolan his traditional 100-day theatrical
Hmm.
window for his next movie, Oppenheimer, coming out in 2023. That was one of the big carrots that Universal had to satisfy in order to get Christopher Nolan to make his movie over there. But again,
Hmm.
that's going to be very few and far between. I know, like, one that I was tracking specifically, given that Universal was the studio that did the, like 17-day window, was M Night and Old, which
Yep.
only showed up on VOD last Tuesday.
I was to
So
say
that
it only
was
just showed up this week.
yeah, so that was close to like 75 days. So I think if you are going to see that exception, it's going to be very specifically tied to a specific filmmaker
Hmm.
that has that clout to pull that off, like a Nolan or an M. Night. But otherwise, probably not.
It still amazes me that there are it honestly still amazes me that there are directors out there still today that actually have that enough of a push, enough of a
Hmm.
name to themselves.
Yep.
Ironically enough, maybe Nolan, but like you say, M. Night, like if you told me somebody like a Scorsese or somebody who's been in the business for 50 years that says I get to make the rules and the studio's gonna say, okay. M. Night's not the first one I think of when you bring up the names though.
But he was certainly one of those directors who, and you talk about this when you did the M Night series, was he was one of those named directors with the public. So when you have
True.
that and you market your movies based primarily upon the name of that
His name.
director, that's what happens. So
That makes total sense. That total sense. So moving on to number three at the box office this week, we have the Adams Family 2. I myself have never seen. I have not seen this. I have never even seen the first one because for me, Adams Family is Raul Julia and Angelica Houston. So maybe one day. So this week looks like comes in at number three at 10.02 million. This is also its second week.
yep.
Where do we come from here to going forward there, Derek?
Yeah. So I did the comparisons earlier today. So after its second weekend, the first Adams Family animated movie, which only came out 2 years ago, believe it or
Mhm.
not, that had made about 55 million so far in its run, finishing at, I think it was like 98 or just under 100. So to
Mhm.
go from like 55 million after 2 weekends for the first movie to 31 million for the sequel, it's a fair amount of a dip. However, one, I know there wasn't that huge of a critical reception for the first Adams Family animated movie.
Yep.
I I know I certainly wasn't hot on it. I know our our buddy Casey Kilderman really did not like the first Adams Family animated movie. So there's certainly that. But we also have to remember, as I noted here, this is also a movie that got a day and date premium VOD release the day it came out
Okay.
in theaters. And that was mainly due to MGM being a little bit worried about, family audiences reluctant to go out to the theater, due to kids under 12 not being able to get vaccinated.
Yep.
So they kind of hedged their bets with that. Certainly, from a theatrical perspective, MGM is kind of looking for this one to kind of hold the course as the dominant family movie all the way up to Halloween. We're certainly trying to cash in on that season because obviously the first Adams Family movie did that 2 years ago. We also had the Hotel Transylvania movies perform that similar function in past years, to the point where the Adams Family actually managed to get Hotel Transylvania 4 to move out of this month completely as a theatrical release and had Amazon buy it. And now Amazon isn't going to premiere it until mid January. So the Adams
Oh,
Family,
Sony.
yeah. So the Adams Family at least carved out its turf, you know, with this. I know there is another animated movie coming out in a couple weeks, Disney's Ron Gone Wrong, which is Zach Galifianakis as a malfunctioning robot. So the Adams Family will have a little bit of competition, but at the same time, they're really hoping that they can kind of play through spooky season to at least make a decent amount of money.
Yeah, and like you said too, I mean, the fact that this was a day of release on VOD as well, I think that plays a big part of it. This probably would have had a bigger, couple weeks or whatnot if it wouldn't have been for that because like you said, you've got kids under 12 who can't get vaccinated. Or even just the fact that if you're going to take your kids to the movie theaters and whatnot, even on a cheap day, if you've got a family of three, mom,
Hmm.
dad, and three kids and whatnot, you're already spending like $50 before you even get into the concession stand. Whereas I believe this was a 19.99 premium
Yep.
VOD
Yep.
right out of the
20.
gate. So,
Yep.
you know,
$20.
mom and dad are going to be like, my kids don't care if it's on the big screen. I'm going to spend $20 and I'm going to watch it at home, and obviously we don't get those numbers. So
No.
I think that plays a huge part in this, in the fact that we just simply know that these numbers would be more if it weren't for that, because you would still have that influx of some of the families going, well, the kids wanted to see it, so I spent the $50. But
Yeah.
I think the VOD definitely has the huge impact on, especially this one, because it is a family film, and it wasn't like that. There's that little weird number between that 20 and that $30 mark where
Yep.
those
Hmm.
families are like, I'll spend $20 to rent this, but I'm not going to spend $30 on it.
Yep.
You
Yep.
know, I
So
think it just kind of depends on the movie. And this, I think they made the wise choice not making this a $30 one because,
yeah,
well,
that would have bridged too far. I mean,
it,
you know,
it
I
was
mean,
dad's
obviously
family.
this is a level under like the Disney $30 premiere access type stuff. Like, okay, for the Disney brand, I might pay $30, but probably not for an MGM animated movie like this. So there's that too.
Exactly. Exactly. So moving on from the Adams family, we're going into a one that, speaking of Marvel here, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings coming at number 4 with 4.2 million, 31% dip. This is week 6 for this one here.
Yep.
Um, and this one here, I see that obviously we've gotten word on to when it's going to be available on Disney Plus. Talk about that one.
Yeah. So Shang-Chi is the highest grossing movie since the start of the pandemic, with 212 million bucks. Obviously, the fact that it's still in the top 5 here after 6 weeks, including competition from another Marvel-ish movie,
Hmm.
really speaks to how well it's been holding up. Um, and probably it's not really going to get truly knocked down until Eternals comes out in 4 weeks.
Yep.
So Disney and Marvel is just kind of keep that Marvel train rolling, from one release to another, which is pretty commendable. Because I know when we first looked at the schedule, and like we're going to get 4 Marvel Studios movies, not just Marvel movies, Marvel Studios movies in the
Yep.
MCU in a 6 month time span, on top of whatever Sony might do with Venom or Morbius, which is going to be January of 2022 as of this point. So the good news is, like, I mean, this has really been able to cut through and really make an impact. Of course, this is a movie that really helped because Disney opened it strictly in theaters,
Yep.
unlike Black Widow, where they did the day and date. I did put the note in here. So with Shang-Chi, Disney's going to take the approach because they have what they call their Disney Plus Day on November 12th, which is going to be their big 2-year anniversary celebration of the launch of Disney Plus. They've got a lot of stuff planned for that day. They're going to put Shang-Chi for free streaming on Disney Plus that day. They're going to do the same thing with Jungle Cruise, as well as a whole bunch of original content. So that's where they're kind of relying on that. But also, in addition, that very same day, that's where you're going to be able to also buy the movie on digital VOD retailers as well. So
Hmm.
they're just going to do that whole big, we're not going to stagger one over the other. We're just going to put them on both the same day. And that's how it's going to be. And then I believe it's going to be November 30 is when they're going to put it out on physical media as well. So that'll be your traditional 3 month window for that. But certainly, no matter what they would do at this point, I mean, Shang-Chi has obviously made a lot of money. It's been the biggest hit since the start of COVID for a reason, because, audiences have really latched onto it. It
Hmm.
really helped that it was really the only big movie out for the entire month of September. So it kind of benefited from just being on top for those 4 weeks. And even as we start to get this competition like Venom and Bond, Shang-Chi is at least still carving out a little bit of money. So
Yep.
good on them for that.
And and I think the 12th of November, if memory serves me correctly, I think it's actually a really good time to release it because this is a week after the Eternals releases.
That's right. That
So
is right.
so so then that way you get those families that are going to go to the theater to go see Eternals. Well, if they didn't get a chance to go see Shang-Chi, which more
Yep.
than likely they probably did because they're going to go see the
Yes.
Eternals, that they can at least go, well, hey, next week I can go and I can get caught up on this and whatnot. Because by as of now, Black Widow is available on Disney Plus as well.
Yep.
Outside of
Yep.
the
For
VOD
free.
side
For free.
for free. Yep. So no, I think that November 12th date is actually a perfect lineup for it, just simply because of the Eternals releasing the week prior to that.
Yep. All right.
Okay. So yeah, so then as I go right about there we go. Number 5. The Many Saints of Newark at $1.45 million in its second week, a 69% drop. For those who may not know, this is a prequel to The Sopranos, which you and I are in the same boat.
Yep.
We had
Neither of us have
never
watched The Sopranos.
no, and I honestly I think that might have a lot to do with it, just simply because of um it, we're getting a full length feature release of a movie for a show that it definitely has a very big fan base, but it's also a show that's been gone for a while. So
Yeah. I mean, this isn't the first time that we've had a feature theatrical movie based on an HBO movie because the
the
two Sex and the
Entourage.
City movies were really huge. And then there was also Entourage, which was a movie. Um,
Yep.
and certainly pre COVID, I know they had some big hopes for this movie because it was going to be, that prequel to The Sopranos. And
Hmm.
when they announced the whole Warner Brothers HBO Max dual release deal and they said that this was going to be one of those, I was like, this is clearly going to be one of the biggest movies or one of the movies that's going to be impacted the most theatrically by this
I would
because
agree.
again, this is an HBO product ultimately. And people are going to feel very, very comfortable like, well, I can just watch this on HBO Max. I'm used to watching Soprano stuff on HBO at home. So for a lot of people, they probably just saw it as, a TV movie.
Yeah.
It opened last weekend to a decent, like, or a little meddling 4.5 million. But then also, again, with a lot of these HBO Max movies, they have really big drops in the
Yep.
second weekend. So that 69%, that doesn't necessarily surprise me. I know in every single theater in Sioux Falls, they currently have the Many Saints Newark limited to just 2 showings a day. Um, so it's actually sharing its screens at every single theater in town. It's sharing its screen with Dear Evan Hansen. And I fully much expect this movie will be completely gone from our city's theaters this Friday.
Oh,
Um,
easily.
but again, it's also going to be a movie that's going to be very front loaded because it's appealing to a very specific Sopranos fan base. It
Hmm.
may not seem prevalent because again we're nearly 15 years detached from when that show ended, but they are out
Right.
there.
Yeah.
But then again, I mean, the people who are going to watch it, I'm sure the vast majority of those people they watch it on HBO Max, and that just makes sense to me. So
You know, And you bring up a very valid point that I would be kind of curious, and it's a thing that we don't get to hear a lot about, is that, what are the number how many eyeballs are getting these releases on HBO Max? Because you've made a valiant effort of making sure that all the dual releases you've seen in the theater.
yes,
Whereas like myself,
yeah.
I've
You've picked
literally
and chose.
I've been cherry picking which ones I go to see in the theater and
Yep.
whatnot. But I myself have been like, all right, well, I got HBO Max. I'm gonna sit watch this in the comfort of my home.
Yeah.
Um, Again, this is like you said, this is based off of an HBO series property that these people, I apologize, the people that are coming to watch this movie and whatnot are the ones that are comfortable watching this in their home because that's what they're used to. I honestly, I would imagine I would be curious to see what those numbers are for like the amount of eyeballs on it at home, because I think it's exponentially a lot higher than what they got at the box office, to the point where I really feel like this is probably a movie they should have just released as like an HBO original, HBO Max original, and just left
Yeah.
it on the service.
And that would have been great because then, if it was strictly HBO Max, then it would have qualified specifically for the Emmys. And that would have made, I mean, we all know how many Emmys The Sopranos made back in the day. So it's like,
Hmm.
well, you can have this movie just kind of clear the floor with that if that's how you chose to do it. But
Yeah,
obviously, you make it theatrical, which means, Oscar isn't going to do anything with it. So yeah, I would have
no.
definitely agreed. Like, if you wanted to take any movie from the HBO Max line or do a release lineup for 2021 from Warner Brothers and just make it truly a streaming exclusive, this would have been the one.
This should have been it because I mean, it's not to argue that there aren't some great performances in it. But like you and myself, who doesn't have that fanfare? We don't we,
Attachment.
we we don't have that attachment like the people who lived and breathed the Sopranos and whatnot to
Yeah.
the point where you and I think you are with me where it's like the movie was fine. The
Yeah.
performance
Yeah.
there are great performances in it,
Yeah.
but we watched this movie and by the end of it you're like okay.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
I
yeah.
agree. I
Yeah. I mean,
good.
we knew enough going into like, oh, it's James Gandolfini's son playing his dad's character.
Hmm.
We know enough about, the context of the movie, to get through it, but again, it's ultimately a movie for the fans. So
Definitely, definitely. And I do wanna point out that for some of the makeup work that was done in that movie made Vera Farmiga almost impossible to recognize along with Corey Stoll.
yeah.
For a hot minute there, I was like, "Who on earth?" I'm like, "No, that is not Farmiga."
Yep, yep.
Alright. So where you wanted to pull up some nice little wonderful little tidbit of information about the Mr. Daniel Craig before we close the show this week.
Yes, yes.
So,
So
yes,
yeah, so
I will
just as
bring
a
it up
fun,
there.
yep. So as I had rewatched No Time to Die earlier today, as of the time we're recording this, and when you have these actors that are very much attached to a very specific role, there's always that caveat of like, can they have successes outside of that franchise? Like a thing I think about is like Chris Hemsworth. He's Thor, but he tries to make all these movies, you know,
To say he's
outside
not
of
Thor.
outside of the MCU, and they usually never work out. So I thought to myself, like, just for funsies, I'm going to grab the list of Daniel Craig's top 5 movies at the box office that are not James Bond movies. And I just wanted to throw it out there as just a fun little tidbit review of a career,
Mhm.
just to kind of give an indication as to, like, what's worked for him outside of Bond, what we might see him in, as he ventures out beyond James Bond. And leading off the list here, big surprise, not really, is Knives Out, which came out Thanksgiving 2019, not
Mhm.
long before the pandemic. It made 165 million bucks. And the ironic thing is, if I recall correctly, this is a movie where he was able to do it because you might recall when they were making No Time to Die, originally it was going to be Danny Boyle of Trainspotting fame who was going to do the
Mhm.
movie. He dropped out. They basically decided, okay, we're going to hire a new director and we're going to rewrite the script. And that window of time gave Daniel Craig an opportunity to fit this movie in right before he started filming the finished version of No Time to Die that we actually got. So through sheer luck of timing, due to the difficulties in getting No Time to Die made, that's how he was able to land not only his biggest box office success outside of James Bond thus far,
Mhm.
but also, as we talked about earlier this year, being able to secure for both him and Ryan Johnson that massive
They got
Netflix
a
payday
payday. Yes.
for the Knives Out sequels. So that's what I was kind of hinting at earlier when we were talking about, now he's kind of got his new franchise that he can lean
Yep.
on going forward, even though, I mean, and I fully expect that these Knives Out movies will be in theaters. They might do like the advanced Cinemark run of those movies, kind of like what we saw with Army of the Dead.
Yep.
But they're definitely not going to be the huge box office hits that this first one was. But
No, no.
again,
They won't be just because they're Netflix and Netflix wants to get the eyes on the screens of where,
yep,
they're
get
streaming
them
and
to
whatnot.
subscribe. So
But, I agree. I definitely think that Netflix is going to at least give us that experience that we come to expect with the franchise.
yeah. Now number two, when I first mentioned this to Brian right before we recorded, he was absolutely shocked about this, but that's right, this actually exists. So Daniel Craig's second biggest non-Bond movie is 2001's original Lara Croft Tomb Raider starring Angelina Jolie, which made 131.1 million in the summer of 2001. So if you
Oh,
really want to feel old, that first Tomb Raider movie is now just over 20 years old. Um,
I
and
but
again,
let's also point out though that based on Daniel Craig's Bond run though, this movie was only 5 years old when he started his run.
yes, yes, that is true. That is true. It definitely has taken a lot out of him. So yeah, you'll notice that, and then also number three here, Road to Perdition, which came out the following summer, made 104.1 million. His first team up with Sam Mendes, who ultimately came on board as the director of Skyfall and Spectre. So we probably have that movie to thank
hmm
for Sam Mendes giving us his entries in the Bond franchise. So, but I did find it very fun and interesting that two of Daniel Craig's biggest movies outside of Bond occurred before he was even a part of the franchise, which I just found amusing. So,
Very much so.
and then number four and number five, they both came out in 2011 during that gap when Craig was basically trying to fill his time, so to speak, because this was during the time when MGM had fallen into bankruptcy again. And that just kept pushing out and pushing out the next Bond movie. So that Christmas of 2011 was where we got David Fincher's Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which made 102.5 million. A ballsy move for a studio to make this as a Christmas release, given what is featured in that movie, but it still made money. And then the summer
It's totally a
before,
Christmas. It's totally a Christmas movie.
yeah, it's the feel bad movie of Christmas, as they marketed it as. And then the summer before was when they did Cowboys and Aliens with Harrison Ford and Olivia Wilde. That made 100.4 million. John Favreau's Breather after making two Iron Man movies. So, yeah. So these are the top five movies. And then I know just outside of this, I think like number six was The Adventures of Tintin, which he was in. People kind of forget that.
Oh
And then I think The
yes.
Golden Compass was number seven. So I thought that just a fun little thing to throw out here to discuss, as Daniel Craig wraps up kind of one era of his career and prepares to move into the next. So,
The one thing I do kind of think of in terms of this here, and I did realize there's one other slide that we were going to talk about too.
oh, that's all right.
Is Daniel Craig is 53 years old. He has spent 28% of his life as James Bond.
Mm-hmm.
You know, uh we look at this here. Look at like Laura Croft and the Cowboys and Aliens and stuff like that. He's getting to that age where he's not going to be able to pull off that super stunty stuff. I think for very much longer,
No,
unless he starts going all Tom Cruise on us here. Let's just hope. Let's just hope that he gets. I'm hoping more of Knives Out. I'm hoping for more of a Logan Lucky kind of thing where he can just have fun with
yeah.
what he's doing, and he doesn't necessarily go all Mamma Mia Pierce Brosnan on
No.
us.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to seeing Daniel Craig try his hand at the musical world. I mean, it might be an embarrassment, but at least it's something to watch. But you're absolutely right. I mean, he is getting older. I never would have wanted him to do like a late period Roger Moore type movie where it's very
Mhm.
clearly not him doing his own stunts. So
Yeah.
the fact that they use that to his advantage, again, they gave Daniel Craig an ending as James Bond. They wrapped it up nicely. That's a nice thing to do, and given how much we've had with like these final movies of sorts recently, like Avengers Endgame or
Yep.
The Rise of Skywalker, trying to create these conclusions of sorts for these franchises we know and love. It's been very interesting, and that worked for me. So,
Yeah, I definitely agree. So the last thing wanted to talk about, and if I would have thought about it, I would have done it before. It's a little trivia here. Um,
that's all right.
that's all right. That's why this is the pilot. This is where we learn from
Yes,
what. This is where we learn what we do wrong.
yes,
And that is actually what opened at number 7 this week. But I look forward to this here,
yeah,
because we have Blam. And the reason why we bring this up here is, as you can see, in week 1, we're only at 583 theaters. But for our local area here, this is actually opening up this week for us here for a new release. Give us a little bit of Lamb.
Yeah. So one of the things we'll do here on the show is, if we have big new releases that open outside of the typical top five, we do kind of want to highlight them here because there will still be interesting stuff to discuss. And with this case, given that Lamb got very, very close to entering the top five,
Mhm.
with again only with a very small number of theaters, because again, James Bond, for example, opened in like 4,400 theaters this
Right.
weekend. So when you have a movie like this that has less than 600, but is still making an impact, that's still pretty good. Again, this is under the A24 umbrella, so you kind of have that hype that's inherent because it's
It's
part of the
A24.
A24 brand. And when you're going to get kind of one of these movies from them that has that very odd tone to it, or horror adjacent,
Hmm.
it kind of creates that expectation. But well, I have to see this just to see what it is. And I know, Brian, when we went to Teton last weekend, the trailer did play for Lamb before that movie, and certainly it advertises a very or a
Bizarre.
reasonably bizarre time. So, you see something like that, and it's like, I definitely want to check that out. And certainly enough people did this weekend to get there. So,
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, like you said, $1 million at only 583 theaters. We're getting it here next week here, so I mean, obviously, this will barely be probably a top 10 movie by next week, which is kind of unfortunate, just because these are the kind of things we kind of look forward to, is something different, something that is not the as much as I love my Marvel movies and my MCU and whatnot, it goes against basically what our typical cliche is in the movie theater, the action
yeah,
flick, the superhero flick. This is something different that, I wish more eyes would get on it. And I agree with you. After watching that trailer, I was like, I'm going to buy a ticket because I don't understand what I just watched, but I need to know more. I need to
yes,
understand what I just watched. So
yeah.
I definitely look
So,
forward for us being able to see this here in the upcoming week.
yeah. Um, but yeah, that's mainly it for topics. I mean, next weekend there will be two movies that will kind of discuss how they open. The first is the Last Duel, which is the first of the two new Ridley Scott movies this fall, starring Adam
Hmm.
Driver and Jodie Comer and Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. Historical epic that's coming from Disney and Fox. But the big story is going to be the opening of, at long last, Halloween Kills.
Yes.
The much anticipated sequel to the 2018 movie. Again, another movie that was supposed to come out Halloween of last year got
Hmm.
pushed back due to the pandemic. A lot of anticipation for it. The first Halloween that opened to like 80 million back in 2018. That was a ginormous hit. It finished at just below 160 in the US alone. It is going to be interesting because this is getting a dual release on Peacock. So it's going to be streaming day and date on Peacock on October 15th, corresponding with its theatrical release. So the big question we'll look at next weekend is, you know, how did the Peacock deal impact people
Hmm.
going to Halloween Kills in the theater? And how will its opening compare to what the previous movie did 3 years ago? So there will be a lot to discuss with that.
Yeah, definitely. Now, do you know with the Peacock release whether or not, because Peacock has multiple tiers,
My
if that
understanding,
if that's going to be straight up available at all, or do you have to be in one of the pay tiers to be able to access it?
you definitely have to be in one of the paid tiers to access it. This is not a movie that they're going to give away just for free.
Oh, darn.
You know,
Gonna want those ads.
yeah, I mean, much like the last time they tried this experiment with the Boss Baby 2 Family Business,
Hmm.
this is Peacock's been struggling a little bit, and they want to get eyeballs on Peacock and get new subscribers to it because we're in the streaming wars, and certainly all the streaming services have been leveraging their parent studios movies to help funnel those streaming services, whether it's been Paramount Plus or Peacock or HBO Max or what have you.
Hmm.
That has just been consistent throughout this pandemic, and certainly Halloween Kills is the latest experiment in that regard.
At least one things we know for sure though is that Blumhouse has gone on record for is the fact that this day and date for Halloween Kills was at the request of the movie production,
Of
not
Jason
not
Blum
of,
himself.
of Jason Blum himself, as opposed to the studio going, you know what, we don't have any faith in this movie. We're gonna
Yeah,
do this. The producers like, no, I want you to do this because I want to get as many eyes on this movie as possible due to the underperformance of Freaky, that is clearly a great movie that just got released at a wrong time.
yeah. I mean, I that really made me feel bad. Was the unfortunate timing of Freaky. As much as I
Mhm,
was excited back in November when that movie came out last year to have a movie that fun coming out.
mhm.
Certainly, the fact that it came out at a time when a lot of theaters and a lot of states were closed. That movie deserved to be like a movie coming out now where you would have had packed houses, and the horror and the gore and the comedy would have all played like gangbusters. And I
Yes.
was just really saddened that Freaky did not have that opportunity, because that certainly did deserve to be, as we talked about way back then. This would have been in like the horror version of the Dwayne Johnson Jumanji movies.
Yes.
And it certainly could have been the horror R-rated equivalent of a hit with that if it had the chance.
I
And
agree.
certainly that's where Jason Blum was coming from, saying, I don't want that to happen again. We've had people, they've waited a year plus for this movie. We're going to get the eyeballs and we're just going to get it out there. We're not going to wait
Yep.
anymore. So that is what it is.
So yeah, yeah, and I look forward to it. And you kind of bring up to kind of alluding to it here, is that if you go to Backlot 605, you can check out all the hard work Derrick does every week for the coming soon. Whether it be new releases, what's coming to 4K Blu-ray, what's coming to streaming services. Definitely recommend everybody, if we haven't talked about it here now, or what we probably will talk about going forward and whatnot, always check out our coming soon because Derrick does an amazing job. I use it every week to get my notes out to see what I need to get watched this week. Um, he does my homework for me basically.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I was just about to
um,
say Brian's weekly homework as he navigates through all the movies he can watch on his
oh,
streaming services.
oh,
So,
I'm still behind. I'm still behind. So, um,
yeah. And
um,
also, I should mention, since you plugged me, you know, if you want to hear actual in-depth discussion on Venom 2 or Shang-Chi, or even later this week, you guys are going to do an episode on No Time to Die.
we
All
are.
those discussions on all those new movies are on the Backlot 605 Patreon feed. For $5 a month, you'll get access to those bonus episodes, 4 episodes a week. Or I'm sorry, 4 episodes a month. Hopefully, not 4 episodes a week.
Wow,
You
you're
guys
gonna
need
put
lives.
you're gonna put me to work there.
but
Casey's gonna be
anywho,
like, "You said what?"
but yeah, so yeah, if you want to hear in-depth discussions on the movies themselves, because I know we talked a lot about the numbers, but if you want to hear about the movies themselves, sign up for the Patreon and listen to those discussions there.
Awesome, awesome. Well, it's been good. I hope everybody has a great week. We will check you out next week here, and have a as Casey would say, something about being on the back lot.
We'll figure out a good outro next time, I assure you.
We need an outro.
Yes.
Bye.
Later.